Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Wee Willie in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Wee Willie opens with d4, and I'm going to play f5. I'm going to play a Dutch. Shout out to my student John, who is a big Leningrad Dutch player, and I was going to play Leningrad if White had ventured the main lines, but knight c3 is an interesting move. I'll play knight f6 against this one. Yeah, let's do that. d5 is another move. I don't know the state of theory as to which one is considered better, but this should be an interesting game nonetheless, just based on the opening. I think I play knight c6 here. It's been ages since I played this opening. e6 is another move. Well, knight c6 though. Knight c6, he doesn't have to advance d5, which is the reason I thought of knight c6, because I recall a line that goes knight c6, d5, knight e5, queen d4, knight f7. But there's no reason to think that White would play that necessarily. e6 is passive. That's why I don't necessarily want to play that move. e6, e4, f takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop e7. I don't think black does particularly well from that position. Let's play d5. We'll revert back to this move. Usually they end up taking on f6. Black typically takes the e-pawn, so we'll do that. I have to admit I prefer to play such positions from the white side more than the black side, playing against the compromised pawn structure. But it's good to challenge yourself. I'll play bishop e6. Usually they try to maneuver a knight into f4. It's one of the main points of this line. Maybe c6 now. Yeah, let's do c6. Reinforce the center. Enables queen b6. My development scheme will be knight to d7, bishop to d6, probably pawn to g6, and most likely castling short. It sort of depends what white does as far as castling, but most likely castling short. So I tried, John. I tried to get a Leningrad, but they didn't cooperate. So maybe I'll try again in the future. Knight h3. So he's coming to f4. I could play bishop d6 straight away, but I think I'll just play g6. This is a common way of addressing the knight f4 threat. So that's if they play knight f4, I can safely drop it back to f7 without worrying about the f5 pawn being lost. That's the point of this. I know a lot of times they try to play h4 and then go h5 to assault this pawn structure, which makes perfect sense. It's almost a minority attack against the four pawns. Because otherwise it's hard to really puncture this structure. White needs to do something involving a pawn break, either h4, h5, or sometimes f3 and e4. Okay, he's sending his queen over somewhere. So what if I play knight d7? How will he respond? Queen over to h3 maybe, but that doesn't really carry with it a threat necessarily. I think he's still planning on the h4, h5 plan. So knight d7, h4. Let's say queen b6. This looks interesting. Yeah, I think I can deal with this. So let's just go ahead and play this move. The knight is bound for the square anyways. I wasn't planning on developing it through a6, so. You can see that the loss I took in the previous game against Bratak 2, that really dropped my rating, plummeted it by 20 plus points. So I'll have to work my way up again. Let's check Wee Willie's stats while we have a spare moment. He is listed as being in the Canadian group. He's probably from Canada. Peak rating of 1792. Yeah, played almost 300 games. He might not be from Canada. He has a US flag. So here, I think I'll play queen a5 and threaten bishop b4. Looks tempting. Yeah, let's do that. I'm retaining the option of castling queenside too. So since white has gone queenside, it's more likely that I'll go queenside myself. I want to follow his king. Okay, king b1 is sensible. So now if I were to play bishop b4, he can drop this knight back to e2 pretty easily. Maybe I'll castle queenside now. I might not play bishop b4 yet. I want to see if I can get him to put a rook on the e1 square before I do that so I can pin him. And maybe it's just more uncomfortable for him if I let him keep the knight there and I don't force him to go knight e2. Okay, plays g4. Allowing me to undouble my pawns, but he knocks out a key supporter of the e4 square. Okay, let's take that. I'll probably play f5 after this. Yeah. f5 seems like the way to go. Could also play my bishop out somewhere, like bishop d6 maybe. I was worried about knight e6, but let's say I go bishop d6. He plays knight e6 attacking my rook. And there's no threat, basically. It's I mean, I could just move my rook. I could also probably play f5. Yeah, f5 would win material. What if bishop d6, he goes e4? That's bad because I just take it. Yeah, so maybe I can just do this. I don't have to play f5 directly. We can take our time. He can now try to push his h-pawn if he wants, h4, h5, to further attempt to create weaknesses on the king side. So I'll be curious if he does that. I still have an eye towards maybe attacking him on the queen side. It's just not possible to do much damage at the moment because I don't have a pawn storm in the process. I can't really bring my b-pawn up without creating more damage against my own king. So I'm just content to complete my development for the moment. If h4, maybe I'll play f5, queen f3, knight f6 is one idea. Because I think he will play f5, queen f3. What about f5, queen f3, rook df8, so that if h5, I can go g5. That also deserves attention. Okay, let's do this move now. I think it's the appropriate time to play this. And I predict queen f3 will be played. Can send my knight into e4, like knight f6, h5, knight e4 is possible. Because if he takes on e4, I get to recapture the d-pawn, and my bishop could combine with the queen to attack a2. I actually really like the look of that. Maybe I'll do that. One problem with putting the queen on f3 is that he can't play pawn f3. Time-wise, I think we're both doing pretty well. He's used less than 4 minutes. I've used about a third of my time, 5 minutes. So knight f6, h5, knight e4. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's do it. It's possible for me to stop him from playing h5 by playing h5 myself, but that would have the effect of creating a backward pawn on g6. So I'm not interested in doing that unless I think h5 is a serious problem. Like if I saw no other alternative and h5 would damage my structure beyond repair, I would play h5 myself, but yeah, only if I was really desperate. Okay, now I think knight e4 could give him problems if I'm assessing this properly. Maybe he plans to just play knight back to e2, the f knight to e2, that is. That could be his plan. Still, though, I see ways that I can create trouble for him. Like if knight back to knight f to e2, maybe bishop b4, and this knight has nowhere to go. Yeah, could be trouble. He could play bishop takes e4 then, though. And if de, he can move his queen, and it looks precarious, but bishop takes c3 would always be met by knight takes c3, so he's not losing. This is a good opportunity to think of my opponent's time, though, because knight fe2, I believe, is forced. Oh, and if knight ce2, by the way, I have this nifty move, knight d2 check, forking his king and his queen. And speak of the devil, he played that. Okay, and is there some strange queen trap if knight d2 check, rook takes d2, queen takes d2, he plays c3? Because that would be really annoying if that actually worked. I have g5 if I need that resource. What about knight d2 check, rook takes d2, queen takes d2, knight back to c3? Threatening rook d1. Please don't tell me that works for him. That would be so annoying if true. You know what's also probably good in this position is just g5. Because where's this knight going to go? Back to g2 or to h3? I mean, knight d2 is also very tempting, but I win an exchange and my queen gets all mucked up. g5 might just be stronger. g5, if he plays knight takes d5, I can take with the bishop. Queen takes f5 check, king over, bishop takes e4, I win a2. That looks good for me. So g5, if he goes knight h3, I can play, what, bishop e6? Looks simple. Threatening g4 and also still having an eye towards playing knight d2. I could also take on f4 right away, but then he could take with the queen, and there's no longer knight d2 check forking the king and the queen. Let's go g5. So I've changed my plan. I'm trying to get knight d2 in under better circumstances, or maybe even not at all. Because I know now bishop takes e4 is a bad decision because of d takes e4, and that might be the case for the next couple moves. So I'm trying to take advantage of that. And this knight just gets misplaced. I mean, if it's forced back to g2, it's misplaced. h3, it's definitely misplaced. I'm thinking he'll probably play knight g2, after which I can go bishop e6, and I would be threatening g4, trapping his queen. I can't play g4 right away after knight g2 because of queen takes f5 check. So I must be patient. Okay, he does go there. So I'm thinking bishop e6. Let's do it. Two threats, g4 and also knight d2. g4 being the main threat. How's he going to defend? I predict queen g2. Yeah, queen g2 is sensible. And that actually deals with the knight d2 check threat as well. So queen d2, maybe I'll play something solid like h6 even. Really? I don't think you can do that. What's to stop me from just taking your knight? I'm not going to go knight d2, but what is stopping this? I don't know if he hallucinated there or he just thought his position was lost, but yeah, he just resigned. Okay, let's have a look. So I played the Dutch. Now, interesting thing about the Dutch. You can think of the Dutch as the Sicilian against d4. It's basically the Sicilian defense played against d4. You're trying to control a center square with a flank pawn. Now, why is the Dutch not as popular as the Sicilian, and why does the Dutch have a worse reputation than the Sicilian? The answer is because you're weakening your king side. You're pushing the f-pawn, which, especially with black, is a risky proposition in the opening. In fact, I tell my beginning chess students, and whenever I teach at chess camps, I used to teach at chess camps with beginning players and very low-rated players who just needed solid piece of advice. I told them that the F pawn stands for forget about it. So F pawn stands for forget about it, because you should forget about moving it in the first many moves in the opening. Not always a good piece of advice for tournament players, but for kids starting out in the game, it's very good advice, because if you've ever reviewed games of kids, you've probably seen so many disasters where one side moves their F pawn too early. So the Dutch, despite having like kind of a dodgy reputation, is actually a pretty good opening. It just must be handled properly, just like any other opening. And categories of openings that entail risk to your king side or give your opponent a real good control of the center, like the King's Indian, for instance, the margin for error is always smaller. So I feel like in openings like the Slav, if something goes wrong, you still have a position to work with. If something goes wrong in a Dutch or a King's Indian for black, your position is often just completely in shambles, and you have no positional basis to fall back on. So, yeah, he played knight c3, which I know is popular. I've never played this move myself from the white side. I usually play g3 from the white side. And if you're unfamiliar with it, the Leningrad Dutch that I was trying to enter could be reached after a line like this, where black plays a fianchetto of the kingside bishop. Say castle, castle, c4, and then d6. And this is an important Dutch line. Black traditionally plays queen e8 and tries to arrange the e5 pawn advance hereafter. And I have a student also named John, which I was giving a shout out to in the video, who really likes this opening for black, and he has pretty good results with it. So I told him I would play it one time. So here you go, John. But white played knight c3 on move 2. I played knight f6, now bishop g5. Now I thought I remembered knight c6 being a move here. Idea d5, knight e5, queen d4, trying to attack the knight, and then knight f7. And I know for a fact I've seen some games that have reached this position. But the only thing that stopped me from playing that is, like, white's not obligated to play d5. He could just as easily play a move like knight f3 or something. And I'm not sure what the point of knight c6 is then. So if you can't justify your move and you suspect it might be a book move but you're not sure, in my opinion, you can't really play it. You have to have a reason for playing it. And the only reason I can come up with is if white plays d5, I'm kind of playing hope chess. If white plays d5, I get into a position I'm familiar with. But that's not good enough, so I played d5 myself, and he took. The reason for d5 is that with this early bishop g5 setup, white often tries to arrange e4 quickly. So black wants to clamp down on that square. Undoubtedly, though, you create some weaknesses in doing this. You allow your opponent to capture on f6, and you have to double your pawns. If white doesn't capture, they could maybe play to use the e5 square, but I think black's control over e4 balances that out. So from this point forward, it's a battle of pawn structure versus bishop pair. Black has the bishop pair, but they have the worst pawn structure. So white will be playing in a way to take advantage of the structure, and you can see that he tried to do a lot on the king side to do that. But yeah, I guess having played this now from the black side, I can see why black has a resilient defensive position. It's not just one-way traffic. It's not like black has double pawns and they're worse because of that. They have a very solid position, and it takes a long time for white to break down those pawns, and in the meantime, black can generate counterplay, hopefully. Knight h3 was interesting. I usually see the development of the knight through e2, but it may just transpose. Let's add the engine now, because I am in unfamiliar territory. Let's just start back here. Yeah, the engine's probably not going to be so great in a position like this. Like knight c6, that looks very ugly. I know it's the engine's top move, but why block your own c-pawn? I thought the knight belonged on d7 much more than c6. I want to create a cohesive pawn structure. So knight h3, I play g6, just prophylaxis against knight f4 so that I can retreat this bishop without fear of losing the pawn on f5. The bishop takes f5. Queen f3, knight d7, castle queenside. Now this interesting move, queen a5. So introducing the possibility of bishop b4. So the engine is kind of unperturbed by that. It's suggesting h3, I guess idea g4, and if I play bishop b4, just dropping this knight back to defend. And maybe that helps them play g4 because they gain another attacker on this f-pawn. And f6 might be weak behind it. Interesting. I think most people would play kind of a reflexive move like he did. What did he play? King b1, I think? Ah, bishop a3, the engine suggestion. I didn't see that move. I just castled. This is interesting. Saying, ha, you can't take me without allowing me to capture your knight, and then you'd have a wrecked kingside, or queenside. And meanwhile, black would be threatening queen b4 with an attack on b2. So how does that go? Knight ce2, queen b4, b3. Yeah, I can see this being nice for black. Queen e7. Guess that's played to maybe give the bishop a retreat. I would also think something like a5, trying to go for a4 makes sense. Okay, but I just castled queenside. So the point I was making earlier about black castling, from the games I've seen in this line, black usually goes the same way that white does. So if white had opted to castle kingside, like in this position, I probably would have done the same. I would have played bishop d6 and more than likely gone this way. Maybe I could castle queenside. I guess I shouldn't rule that out in this position because I'm probably in a better position to pawn storm his king than he is to pawn storm my king if I were to go long. So I'd probably play bishop d6 and just reassess on the next move what to do. Maybe I play even queen e7 on the next move and really keep my options open. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back a little bit. So he played king b1. I castled. He went g4. I took. The queen took. Yeah, I'm not sure g4 is the right way to assault my pawn structure. I kind of like starting with h4 and leave g4 for later, if at all. But he did play that. I took. He took. I played bishop d6 because I didn't see a reason to play f5 right away. It's possible to do that, but I thought I could just make a developing move with no repercussions. Because knight e6 is a silly thing to be afraid of. It only attacks my rook and nothing else. Yeah, I can move the rook and attack his knight. I thought f5 was also good. Attacking the queen and blocking the queen from defending the knight. I do see that the engine likes this, though, with a messy position because he's attacking my rook and the bishop. So probably rook de8 would be safer in this case. He played h4. I played f5. Yep, this seems to be correct. Queen back to f3, knight into f6. So that's a nice side benefit of having moved my f-pawn, is that my knight actually gets a square to go to. Because with the two pawns on f5 and f6, this knight can't hope to activate itself on the king side, really. I mean, its most likely prospects to be activated would be something like b5 and knight b6, maybe coming into c4 later. So it's really nice that I was able to slide my knight into this f6 square, because e4 has presented itself as a key target. Great outpost square for my knight. So he played h5. I went knight into e4. And he went knight back. Yeah, undoubtedly, black has the initiative right now. He has to figure out how to quell that. And if bishop takes e4, I was going to take with the d-pawn. Let's say he moves his queen, queen h3. This might be his best bet, though. He is somewhat solid. I mean, bishop b4 can be met by this move now. And at least he always has a replacement knight at the ready. He'll need to keep a knight on c3 now, though, so he doesn't lose a2. This looks dangerous to me, and I mean, the computer seems to indicate that black is doing well. Note that the queen holds this pawn, so he can't take it. So, yeah, he needs a precise defensive sequence to make sure my advantage doesn't grow in this position. I thought he would play knight fe2. That's a move I was anticipating. And I was kind of playing around with the idea of bishop b4 then. But maybe it's not that bad if he just plays bishop takes, by analogy with the last line, and just leaves these knights where they're at. They're passive, but they hold everything, especially a2. So instead, he played knight ce2. Let's see if I'm correct about
check.
Knight d2 check. I wonder if he was baiting me into playing that move, because it's so tempting just to check and fork the king and the queen. But after rook takes d2, queen takes d2, yeah, this move knight c3, cutting off my queen's retreat. And he's simply threatening rook d1. Looks like the engine thinks he's much better, if not winning. Yeah, I didn't want to mess with this. Not worth an exchange to get your queen trapped far behind enemy lines by itself. Okay, so g5 is a good move. King b8, I don't know why I would play king b8. I mean, on principle, king b8, as the computer is suggesting, is a good move, but it seems something more active is called for. And g5, based on the game, is a very attractive move. So my thinking was, if he played knight g2 or knight h3, the knight would be offsides, and potentially the threat of g4 could be decisive. Engine says he should play queen h3, so that if take, you can take here and then pick up the bishop. Yeah, and queen h3 also stops knight d2 check, winning the queen, or the exchange. I didn't see queen h3, but yeah, I probably would have played g4 in reply. Queen h4 holding the f2 pawn. It's better for black, but yeah, this is vastly superior to the game continuation. Because in the game after knight h3, he just collapsed. I want to play g4, but I can't because of queen takes f5 check. So just a prophylactic move is called for, stopping queen takes f5. And now we have g4 and knight d2 as a threat. Yeah, I thought queen g2 was his best bet because that's the only move that deals with both of those threats. It does look like black has a great position, though, still. I mean, something like rook h g8 should be good now. I've got good pawn support, nice outpost for my knight, 2 strong bishops, play on all areas of the board. If he plays f3, I could probably just retreat my knight. And knight f6 is fine because note that he cannot capture on g5 because of h6, exploiting the pin on his queen. I feel like if black is able to maintain the g5 and f5 pawns, then he has won the battle for the kingside pawn structure. Yeah, so this would have been pleasant as well, but queen g2 looks to be his best bet. Instead, he did that and just gave away the game. I don't know why he did that, or why he only spent 30 seconds on it. But he might have just been very unhappy with his position, or he was only anticipating... I don't know what he was anticipating. Maybe knight d2 check is what he was anticipating. I don't know, which I would not have played because of this. And I would be losing. So, okay. That was fun. Maybe I'll play the Dutch again. You know, I used to play the Dutch way back when, but I usually played the Stonewall Dutch. I can't recall what I used to do against knight c3. I played the Dutch when I was around 2000 ELO. Probably, 12, 13 years ago now. It was my main weapon against d4. So, at any rate, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you have any feedback, feel free to leave it in the comments, as always. Alright, I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.